Hey Ecofictologists, my name is Lovis and today I want to talk about something slightly different. Last week I did my review of Clade by James Bradley and I talked about this sense of grief and loss that is conveyed by that book. When I listened to interviews with the author, he talked a lot about the mental toll that thinking and writing about climate change all the time has on you and that it can get overwhelming. This feeling is not restricted to people who write about climate change or research climate change. It's something that a lot of people are feeling right now because climate change is becoming more part of our everyday conversations, which is good on one hand because it's important to talk about, but on the other hand, it's depressing and it brings down the mood and it just produces feelings of anxiety, of sadness, of hopelessness and powerlessness. And there is a word for this now. It's being recognized as a real psychological phenomena and is being referred to as ecological or eco-grief. Like with so many mental health issues, there is still a certain stigma around talking openly about these feelings of anxiety and depression. It can be really difficult to articulate why you're feeling this way or what it even is that you're feeling. This is going to be a two-part series because otherwise this video would be very long. There's so much to talk about around this topic. I've said in several videos that I think the framework of fiction gives us a medium to explore some really difficult topics because we're removed enough from them that we can see things from a different angle and we can let the characters in the novel or piece of writing that we're reading take us through their experiences. So today I'll be talking about what eco-grief is and the need for an outlet, and then next week I'll be talking about how I think eco-fiction could potentially be one of these outlets to let us explore these feelings more deeply. So grab that nice hot cup of tea, make sure you're comfortable, and let's just have a conversation. Now, at this point, I want to make absolutely clear that I am in no capacity a psychologist. I did not study psychology. I haven't even spoken to a psychologist. So anything that I say in this video comes from articles and papers that I've read or my own experiences with these emotions. In that same line of thought, everyone is going to experience this differently. Just like with most mental health issues, the experiences are unique. So if I say something that is generalized in this video, please don't take that to mean that this is the only way that it can be. That being said, I did want to start having this conversation because I think it's important, and I do think that ecofiction has a role to play. First of all, what exactly do I mean by eco-grief? There are several other phrases being used, eco-anxiety, solastalgia, Anthropocene blues, and while I do acknowledge that these are all slightly different things, and you can experience one without experiencing any of the others, for brevity's sake, in this video I'm going to refer to them all under the umbrella term of eco-grief. But if you are interested in knowing the finer points and the differences between these terms, I've put lots of resources down below, so I encourage you to take a look at those. Speaking broadly, all of these terms refer to the distress that we feel when we think about the deterioration and degradation of the environment and our homes. I've also read it described as a feeling of homesickness that you feel when you are still at home. We are in a unique moment in time when we know the world around us is changing. Mostly not for the better, and it will continue to do so for the foreseeable future, no matter what we do. We might be able to make progress in a certain direction, we might be able to slow it down, we might be able to turn it away from the worst case scenario, but change is going to happen. Something about eco-grief is that it can be very hard to articulate because the thing that we are anxious about is so big, but it can manifest itself in really small ways. It can be very, very much present all around us, but it's also measured in decades and centuries, and so can feel very distant. These juxtapositions can make identifying what is so distressing very confusing. Eco-grief can be a very enigmatic combination of anticipatory grief, where you are preparing to grieve for something that is not yet gone, it's not been lost yet, and simultaneously grieving for what has already been lost. Along with this grief is also a feeling of guilt that we have contributed to this loss, that we are complicit in our actions, our behaviors, our lifestyles. There's a lot of worry involved, and this is where eco-anxiety comes in specifically. All these questions of what is the future going to look like? What do future changes mean for our lives and the lives of our children? Uncertainty can be very distressing. But also this knowledge of change will happen no matter what we do goes hand in hand with the hopelessness of individual action. Like, what's the point? What could I possibly do now? I suppose it's not such a strange concept when you think about it. I mean, our physical and sensory environment has always had an effect on our mental health, so why shouldn't our natural environment do so as well? We connect memories with places. Our surroundings are part of how we define ourselves. You know, some of my favorite childhood memories are going to a certain beach with my family, exploring these amazing rock pools that were there, and then going up and seeing monarch butterflies that had congregated there and were roosting there. And to think that those monarch butterflies won't come back to that place because of climate change, or those rock pools, that ecosystem is lost because of sea level rise. That makes me very sad. I can never go back to that place and experience those memories. And going back to the video I did last week on Clade, you can't talk about climate change without talking about loss. Everyone experiences loss. We have common ground here. We have somewhere to start to have a conversation. Eco-grief is becoming so prevalent, and so many people are seeking help for this crippling amount of anxiety that they're feeling, that it's becoming its own branch of psychology, with psychologists specializing in how to help people acknowledge and cope with eco-grief. The American Psychological Association released a climate change guide for mental health care providers on how to deal with it. So if you thought you were alone with this, you most definitely are not. At this point you might be thinking, oh, this is not making me feel any better at all. So I want to transition to something more positive, because I do think while eco-grief can feel so heavy and sad, giving it a name and acknowledging it has power. This elusive thing, just pin it down, give it a name. Eco-grief. Okay, I can move forward now. Because emotion creates connection. We've talked about this before. And emotion is something we are sorely lacking when it comes to policy and politics. And I think eco-grief can really give weight to the language that we use to decide what happens next. The stakes are high. We are talking an ecological loss, yes, but it's also a human loss. If you recognize that what I've been talking about applies to you and you want to learn more, because definitely what I've said here is a very brief overview and there is so much more to read and talk about in this field, I want to point you to some resources, things to read, things to listen to. I'm going to send you to the Climate Psychology Alliance website, which I have linked below. They have a podcast called Catastrophe or Transformation, where they face difficult truths about climate change and the ecological crisis, and they talk about the range of emotional responses that people have. I've listened to a few episodes and they are fascinating, and it's quite cathartic to listen to somebody talking candidly about these things. The CPA run online seminars and provides safe spaces for people to get some of these feelings just out in the open. They have a big long list of resources on their website, other organizations doing something similar, articles to read, so I definitely highly recommend you to have a look at that. And of course, come back next week where I talk specifically on how I think ecofiction can be one of the outlets that we use to explore and express some of these emotions. I hope to see you then, but that's all from me for now. So I'll see you next week, Ecofictologists.